Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. We're here overheating in in the very heated monastery, and so it's the winter in New Jersey. So outside it's very cold. Welcome to Kumu and Sud and Geeta, as well as any other friend who is joining in and hasn't checked in quite yet. So this evening we will be talking about the topic of why don't monastics have a job, which actually sometimes here and there we're asked this question, sometimes in a nice way, sometimes in a less than nice way. And apparently also the Buddha was actually asked this question back in his time. So there is a sutta that we will be reading to you all and then discuss here. But before that, I will invite Bhante Sudazo to guide us in meditation.
So go ahead and get in an upright sitting position. So taking a few moments to make sure your posture is very good. So very stable, balanced, upright. With your shoulders back and relaxed. So not leaning forward or back. And take a few long, slow, deep breaths. With each breath, letting the body and mind relax. Bringing a slight smile to your lips. So remembering that we're about to do something wonderful, something marvelous. We're about to follow in the footsteps of the Buddha. We're following the path of the fully awakened one. We're following exactly the same steps that every awakened being of the past has followed. The same steps that every awakened being of the future will follow. So taking a moment to delight in walking this ancient, time-honored, proven path that leads inevitably towards full awakening, towards perfect wisdom, towards unconditional happiness. And remembering that we have exactly the same potential for awakening that every being has. We have exactly the same potential for awakening that the Buddha had before he became the Buddha. The same potential that every bodhisattva has. We have within us the ability to become just as perfected as all the awakened beings of past, present, and future. It's just a matter of practice and training. And now we're going to engage in that practice and follow that training. Step after step, drawing closer to awakening. Drawing closer to actualizing our potential, to manifesting our Buddha nature. So bringing full awareness to the present moment, focusing on clearly feeling our body, so practicing mindfulness of the body, the same practice that all the Arahants and Buddhas of the past, present, and future practice. We focus on clearly, intensely feeling our own body with a still, sharp, and joyful mind. Bringing body and mind to complete stillness, ceasing all intentional movement of body and mind. Enjoying how the body feels when it's completely still and saturated with attention. Just keep magnifying these three qualities: stillness, attentiveness, and enjoyment by focusing on your body. No matter what sensation appears in the body, perceive it as pleasant, enjoyable, with a serene and attentive mind. You can adjust your posture. Do a little bit of stretching if you wish to. Take a moment to reflect that you've followed the Buddha's footsteps for a few more steps. So a few more steps closer to awakening.
Thank you, Bhante, for guiding us in meditation. Welcome to a few more friends that are joining in. Hello to Maria, Amaranta, Mary, Jayanta, Ame, Say, and Yanni Q. Hope you're better, Yanni, that your health has improved. And we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. All right, so like last night, I will start reading from the sutta that you have. It's Samyutta Nikaya 7.11. The Kasi Bharadvaja Sutta. So you have the link of Bhante Sujato's translation, but I will be reading from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So at any time, you're welcome to put comments or questions, and we'll try our best to address them. All right, so the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Magadhans at Dakinagiri, near the Brahmin village of Ekanada. Now, on that occasion, the Brahmin Kasi Bharadvaja the plowman, had 500 plows. Is that right? The translation, pronunciation. Thank you, Bhante. Fastened to their yokes at the time of sowing. Then, in the morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking bowl and robe, went to the place where the Brahmin Kasi Bharadvaja was at work. Now, on that occasion, the Brahmin Kasi Bharadvaja's food distribution was taking place. Then the Blessed One approached the place of the food distribution and stood to one side. This reminds me of Bhante, so when we go alms round, and we did Pinapata, for example, in Italy, and we're pretty much nowhere that we went to had people expecting us, or had people see monastics, or were acquainted with what we were doing. So we basically did exactly what the Buddha did. So approached a place for the food distribution and then sat to one side. Very simple. And the Brahmin Kasi Bharadvaja saw the Blessed One standing for alms and said to him, Recluse, I plow and sow, and when I have plowed and sown, I eat. You too, ascetic, ought to plow and sow. Then when you have plowed and sown, you will eat. Also reminds me of that lady in Milan when she asked us, what are you doing here? And we answered, and then she looked at us, and basically she kind of said, get a job. And left by saying, good luck, while rolling her eyes. Italians are a little bit more direct than the average American. So we've had that interaction, but also actually here in the States sometimes they have some people have made these comments. But what's interesting is the Buddha's reply to the Brahmin Bharadvaja, and he says, I too, Brahmin, plow and sow, and when I have plowed and sown, I eat. And the Brahmin Bharadvaja replies, But we do not see Master Gotama's yoke or plowshare or goad or oxen. Yet Master Gotama says, I too, Brahmin, plow and sow, and when I have plowed and sown, I eat. Then the Brahmin Kasi Bharavaja addressed the Blessed One in verse. You claim to be a man who works the plow, but I do not see your plowing. If you're a plowman, answer me. How should we understand your plowing? It's very difficult when you're ESL. The plow and the plow.
It's difficult even when it's your first language.
Oh, okay. That makes me feel better.
You actually speak English better than a lot of native speakers.
Thank you. Very kind.
It's just facts. It's not kindness. It's just truth. The hard language.
So maybe actually for those of us who are ESL that maybe are not too familiar with the plow and the sow and the goad and the oxen, do you want to maybe Bhante explain a little bit what the Brahmin is saying?
Yeah, I mean, briefly. So the plow is a metal blade that would be used to turn the soil so that you could plant crops in it. The yoke is how you would attach the plow to your yoke, and plowshare is how you attach the plow to your oxen. And the goad is the whip that you use to get the ox to move forward. So these days we have big petrol-powered machines that do this, but in those days it was an ox getting whipped and pulling a metal blade through the earth, which is not very nice to the ox, by the way. But this is the way that people would cultivate the ground in those times, and actually up until very recently. It's only in the less than 100 years that we've switched to machinery instead of using animals.
Thank you, Bhante. So in essence, the Brahmin, is asking the Buddha, well, I don't see you having all this equipment for farming, but yet you claim that you're actually doing this work, and so that you're farming and then you're eating. So what exactly do you mean by that? And the Buddha replies, faith is the seed, austerity the rain, wisdom my yoke and plow, shame is the pull, mind the yoke tie, mindfulness my plowshare and goad. Would you like to make some comments about it?
Yeah, so can we pull up the Pali text?
Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, basically the Buddha here, he's drawing a metaphor to spiritual practice. So he's indicating here that when he talks about plowing and sowing, he's not talking about cultivating the soil. He's talking about cultivating one's mind. So he says faith is the seed, so saddha bija. So what's the original necessary component for any crop to grow? It's the seed. So with no seed, there will definitely never be any crops, no matter what else you do. So here the Buddha is emphasizing that faith is the critical basic foundation for Buddhist practice. And this is something which a lot of Western convert Buddhists like to skip over or sweep aside or pretend isn't in the Buddhist text, but it's actually inescapable. And this is actually really noticeable in people who practice meditation, people who start with strong faith in Buddha and Dhamma. When they come and practice meditation, it's a lot easier for them. People who don't have faith in Buddha and Dhamma, meditation practice can be extremely challenging, extremely painful and difficult. It's not that it isn't painful and difficult if you have faith, but rather the faith gives you the strength to persevere in the face of that difficulty, because you have deep confidence that it's really worth doing and that it leads to a goal beyond anything imaginable. One of the suttas, actually a few places in the suttas, the Buddha says, if somebody were to stab you 100 times in the morning, and then stab you 100 times at noon, and then stab you 100 times in the evening, And they were to do this every day of the year for 100 years. But at the end of that 100 years, you are guaranteed to attain the first stage of awakening. The Buddha says that would be a good trade. You would come out ahead on that trade. So if you have faith in the path of awakening, then that gives you the strength and persistence to stick it out and really commit yourself to the training. But if you don't have that faith, then getting stabbed 300 times a day for 100 years, no thank you. I'll skip. That sounds awful. So faith is the seed, because with faith as the basic starting point of our practice, then we'll do whatever it takes. So faith in our own capacity to become awakened, faith that the Buddha was awakened, faith that the Dhamma he taught leads to awakening. These are really critical if we want to have a sincere commitment to our practice. Next he says, austerity is the rain. So austerity is a translation here of tapo. So tapas, it means austerity in the sense of dedicated spiritual practice, a willingness to endure difficulty. So in the time of the Buddha, commonly tapas was used to refer to the practices of self-torture that religious practitioners would do, believing that self-torture was a way to develop wisdom. The Buddha took that word and redefined it a little bit. So saying that rather spiritual power, spiritual progress is developed through renunciation and contentment. It's developed through meditation practice rather than through self-torment. So this is the rain. So again, if you plant good seeds in the soil, but the seeds never get any water, then they either won't grow at all, or if they do grow, they'll be very small and stunted and weak. You won't get any food from them. And then he says, wisdom is my yoke and plow. So again, we're guided by wisdom. So wisdom is what guides us. It's what makes sure we're going in the right direction. And then it says, the translation here is shame, but the Pali word is hiri, which I prefer to translate as conscience. So hiri is your basic innate sense of right and wrong, your innate sense of what's good and what's bad. So with conscience is the pole. So in other words, conscience is what helps us steer, what's keeps us going straight along the path. And all of this is bound together with the mind and held with mindfulness. So he says, mindfulness is my plowshare and goad. So all of this tied together. So faith, austerity, wisdom, conscience, and mindfulness, all of this together is the equipment for cultivating the mind. So here the Buddha, again, he's drawing metaphors, which were immediately understandable to a farmer. So the Brahmin he's talking to knows exactly what seed, rain, yoke, plow, pole, yoke, tie, plowshare, and goat. He knows exactly how all these things are used. So when the Buddha analogizes all of this farming equipment to training the mind, this is something that the Brahmin can easily understand. Those are a few thoughts on that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bhante. And then the Buddha continues with guarded in body, guarded in speech, controlled in my appetite for food. I use truth as my weeding hook and gentleness as my unyoking. So beautiful. So actually this is very much connected to also the discussion that we were having last night. And so the instructions, of course, that the Buddha gives us throughout the suttas on the importance of restraining ourselves in guarding the six senses, so through body, speech, and mind. And also we have to eat every day, or at least almost every day. We can't really skip too many meals. So, food is the sustenance of our body. So it's something that we need to learn how to deal with, because it can actually be the source of a lot of different defilements. Through body, speech, and mind, actually. And so going at the root of it and controlling the appetite for food, as he's sharing here. So all kind of like common day-to-day things. It's very down to earth, both in terms of the metaphor, but also like practical advice, practical instructions of, how. What I really love about Buddhist practice is that it's extraordinarily ordinary. For real, we tend to think of spiritual practice as something, like all these psychic powers or like over the top. But in reality, actually, it's paying attention to the ordinary, and actually giving the right importance to every single action that we do, and understanding causality, cause and consequence. So actually, I was really appreciating Bante's invitation to think of Yoniso Manasikara as a reflection of causality, right? So I was reflecting a lot actually on it in the past couple of hours since we've had that conversation. And yeah, that is basically essentially, the practice that we use, we do with mindfulness. Essentially, what we're trying to do is understand causality, and how even, not controlling our appetite for food, something that seems kind of, not that really much of a big deal, actually can have a lot of negative consequences for us. Or not restraining the senses. And how do we do this training? By I love using truth as my leading hook. So for those of us who have done gardening, we start understanding at the very beginning, everything looks the same, it's all like seedlings. So we're like, oh, well, I don't know if this is the seedling of a tomato plant or of lettuce, or if it's unnecessary weed. But then after a while, we start understanding, we see the differences, we become acquainted also with the smells of the seedlings, so we start recognizing them, and there are some nice little tools, weeding hooks that we can use to remove them. So using the truth as the weeding hook, rather than our opinions, rather than our likes and dislikes, rather than what we think, rather than going at it out of delusion. Instead, we use truth. Gentleness as my unyoking. That is a very interesting one. Actually, what are your reflections on gentleness as my unyoking, Bante?
So gentleness is so rachang. I'm a little unclear why he translated pamochana as unyoking. So pamochana literally means releasing or letting go. Unyoking, I don't quite agree with, because the word that's used there is not yoking. So pamochana means releasing, letting go. So I would translate that as gentleness is my letting go.
My release is how Bhakti Sujato translated it.
Yeah. So I think that's more the point here, is that so like with truthfulness, we identify the weeds. So we see the weeds growing in our mind, and we pull them out and gently let them go. So that's the image that I'm seeing the Buddha using here. So again, it's not like we pluck the weed and we're like, oh, these disgusting, vile things, oh, away with thee. But rather you pick it up and you just gently drop it. Like you see, oh, this is not useful. You just gently drop it. So that's more the imagery that I see the Buddha using here. Yeah, so on this occasion, I
think that probably Venerable Body was trying to also keep the poetry, the poetic aspect of the poem. So hence unyoking, or releasing, in the way that it's we're still talking about agriculture, and the Buddha obviously is using all these terminology both to be understood by the farmer, but also to make a kind of point that actually he's doing the most difficult work, which is to remove greed, hatred, and delusion, essentially. And in fact, he proceeds by saying, energy is my beast of burden, carrying me to security from bondage. It goes ahead without stopping, to where, having gone, one does not sorrow. In such a way, this plowing is done, which has the deathless as its fruit. Having finished this work of plowing, one is released from all suffering. And would you like to comment on this, Bante?
Yeah, so he says, energy is my beast of burden. So in other words, one uses an ox or a horse or a donkey or something to pull your plow. But the Buddha is saying what keeps me going ahead in my practice is my own energy, my own resolute dedication to persisting in the practice. So this is also indicating the quality of self-reliance. We can't depend upon other people to do the work for us. So we need to develop our spiritual practice ourselves. We can't expect other people to do it for us.
Right. And then, of course, highlighting the destination, the purpose of this, which is not 10% happier, just not getting necessarily better at whatever, their daily job or less stressed out, but rather this practice leads to deathless. This practice leads to the end of suffering. Very, very important. One is released from all suffering, not a little bit of suffering, not released from, I don't know, the stress of being in traffic, but released from every single type of suffering. That's why Buddhism is extremely optimistic. Getting back to the question that our friend last night was asking us. And the Brahmin replies, "Let Master Gautama eat. The worthy is a plowman, since Master Gautama does plowing that has even the deathless as its fruit." And then there are, maybe we can read from Bhante Sujata, since here there's the dot.
Can we get Ikabody's translation?
It's a little bit complicated because we'll have to go to the...
It's only a little bit back, 636. There. There we go. Yeah, right there. Here, starting here.
Food over which verses have been sung is not fit to be eaten by me. This Brahman is not the principle observed by those who see. The enlightened ones reject such food over which verses have been sung. As such, a principle exists, O Brahmin. This is the rule of conduct. Serve with other food and drink, the consummate one, the great seer, with taints destroyed and remorse stilled, for he is the field for one seeking merit.
Yeah, so this is pointing to one basic principle that the Buddha is saying. Is he's saying that the act of giving alms food to a monk is something that should be done freely. So he's basically, what the Buddha is saying here is like, Brahmin, you weren't willing to give me food just a moment ago. It's only after I put on a little performance that now you're willing to give me food. So in other words, he's saying, if I accept this food at this point, then it's creating a precedent that monks have to do a song and dance if they want to get fed. But that's breaking the basic idea of a freely given gift, which is then received gratefully without expectation from either side. So there's, this Buddha is saying like, I'm not willing to accept this because that breaks the basic concept of a freely given gift.
Yeah, essentially it would be no different than a payment. So you have provided a service and then here is your meal, it's instead of an in-kind donation, it's an in-kind payment. And, I feel like the Buddha actually has created, the system and these rules for monastics, not to be hermits, not to be independent, and to be quite inconvenient. Sometimes it can be much easier to, just, make some pasta by yourself. Very easy, like very quick, You don't have to go on alms round. Like, for example, when we were in Italy, it could take quite a long time to go all the way to walk to the village, stand there, um, get food and so forth. Like, it takes quite some time, as opposed to, if we were to be storing food, we could just make it very fast, and then we could have a lot of different hours available at hand to do whatever we wished with our practice. So sometimes it can feel a little bit inconvenient, but we see actually how every single precept there is behind a very noble intention, which is to create these opportunities for ourselves and others to practice, us as monastics or us as lay people, and vice versa, relating to monastics and relating to lay people, in order to create conditions for selfless generosity, conditions for dana, for giving, conditions for letting go to arise naturally. It is so beautiful, actually, when one starts observing how incredible, when we were, for example, in Italy, people were not Buddhist, were not interested in mindfulness, they were not interested in meditation, they were not interested in, getting anything from us. And when they would learn that actually we would only receive food and not receive any type of money, they were delighted to see that there was an opportunity to make merit, essentially, so to make a good action. And so we see that this is a universal language that the genius of the Buddha understood straight away, that creates the conditions for wholesomeness to arise in the mind of every single being. It's the most democratic way, actually, of practicing the Dhamma. It can reach anyone from every single class. If you go to Thailand, for example, what really impressed me, was at the very beginning, was like, oh, it's interesting. I come from Italy, so the Catholic Church has a lot of food programs, for example, right, to feed the poor, feed the hungry. And in Thailand, there was no such thing. But then there was also, like, I couldn't see any people begging for food on the streets. And then when you actually are in the temples, you see that there's everyone, every single person, from the poor to the rich, to the richest one. And each one will give whatever it is in their means, even like a crumble there on the table, and partake in the merit, and also like share with obviously make offerings to the Sangha, but then share with one another whatever is left over, which is always very abundant. So we see that all of that, creates a kind of horizontal, actually, way of sharing goods, without there being someone that is superior or inferior from the other. But it's everybody is delighting, actually, in Dhamma, and delighting in giving, delighting in receiving, and it's a very joyful and beautiful interaction. And so we see how if the Buddha, had accepted food in this occasion, it wouldn't have come from that place of, I want to make merit, I want to delight my mind with this beautiful act of generosity, but it would have come in, it's kind of like, oh, today's special only minus 20% out of your subscription, click here and you get a free meal, kind of thing. So we see that this is a teaching, first and foremost, in Dhamma, and how it's important for us monastics to hold precepts so that we can keep sharing the Buddha's teachings in the traditional way. And the Brahmin Bharadvaja was very enthusiastic, just like me right now. So he says, when this was said, the Brahmin Kasi Bharadvaja said to the Blessed One, "Magnificent, Master Gautama, magnificent, Master Gautama. The Dhamma has been made clear in many ways by Master Gautama, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go for refuge to Master Gotama and to the Dhamma and to the Bhikkhu Sangha. And Master Gotama, remember me as a lay follower who from today has gone for refuge for life. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yeah, very beautiful.
Maybe we can see what questions there might be. So at this time, you're welcome to offer some questions, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Okay, and welcome to all the other friends who have been checking in. So Sud says, Venerable, what if someone gives ingratitude, for instance, alms to help the Sangha out of gratefulness? Surely the gift of Dhamma that Buddha or Sangha gives is priceless. No one can pay for that even. Yeah, I think that's, once again, it's actually what we were talking about earlier. It's a wholesome mind state that, yeah, there's a lot of gratitude. I think in this particular sutta, the Buddha understands that the Brahmin, he's not really necessarily coming out of gratefulness, but rather with that kind of sense, okay, actually, you deliver the service that is worthy of offerings. So his mind state was a mind state of exchange rather than a mind state out of gratitude. And my understanding is also that at the time of the Buddha, also that was very much a practice among the Brahmin class. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dante Sutaso, because there's also other suttas where we see that there is a Brahmin that it's his custom to actually give monetary donations to spiritual practitioners who deliver the Dhamma. So yeah, it's more how our the Buddha obviously is a perfect being and so understands exactly the conditions that the people that he's dealing with are facing, and that was the appropriate response in this case, so that then it was actually also a teaching for the Brahmin who could realize the sort of subtleties and actually then create a mind of gratitude, create a mind of happiness. And in fact, then he becomes a follower of the Buddha. And Sud says, how can what Brahman offered become a payment? I don't understand this.
I think you just explained that pretty clearly.
Yeah, I mean, it's food. So as we were saying, there can be in-kind donations or monetary donations, and there can be in-kind payments and monetary payments. So that's bartering is also like a form of exchange. They're not necessarily like money, but it can be a payment. And Bobby says, what merit can a fictional character attain?
Well, only sentient beings can attain merit. So a fictional character is, I assume by this you mean like a character in a book or a movie or something. Yeah, that's not a person. It's not a sentient being. So of course there's no merit that can be attained. The author can attain merit, or the actor can attain merit, but a fictional character itself is not a sentient being. You have a question, Dante?
So question is, in the Buddha's time in the suttas, in terms of offering and receiving from the lay people, were the monks always homeless?
Not always.
Temples never established in that time where temples were given? Because my understanding was that there would be a place where the monks would stay for vasa, but they didn't have any ownership over it.
So there were definitely temples and monasteries donated to the Sangha. But it is, as you say, that properties and buildings are technically not owned by any one particular monk, but rather they're owned by the Sangha as a whole. It's like Empty Cloud Monastery, it doesn't belong to Ayasoma, it doesn't belong to Bhante Suraso, it belongs to the Mahasangha. So all the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis of the entire world as a collective Sangha. So all of the real estate that is owned by the Sangha, it's owned by the entire Sangha of the whole world, not by any one particular bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. Now, sometimes because of the laws of any given country, you need to have somebody's name on a piece of paper somewhere. But that's just the laws of the country, and it doesn't actually apply to the monastic rules.
Is there, it might be a little off the topic, but is there any particular descriptions of monks living residentially in the suttas, like living more full-time inside these temples or inside these places?
Yeah, there's references to that. Yeah. And this is getting a bit off topic, so maybe better to talk about this tomorrow during monk chat. Yeah.
Any other reflections?
Just thank you about clarifying that issue about food. I think there's a very similar sutta in the Sutta Nipata. It's similar, I think, where they talk. It's a similar exchange, and it's always thrown me off. The conversation about the food has always been like kind of thrown me off. So thank you for having that discussion and clarifying that for me. It's always been a question.
Yeah, there's basically an implicit where the person is they're effectively saying, I will give you food, but only if you do something for me first. Like, I'll give you food, but first you have to give me a Dhamma talk. It's like, well, then it's no longer a gift. It's now barter. It's a transaction. So that's what the Buddha is saying. He's saying a gift should be a gift. It should not be a transaction.
It's very cool.
And then there is Mary that says, I like the story of being stabbed with 100 knives every day because it reminded me of my former corporate career. I'm grateful I no longer have to deal with this every day.
Yeah, and the problem is the corporate career doesn't lead to awakening. So you get the 100 knives, but not the awakening at the end.
Yeah, isn't it bizarre how sometimes we make these choices, right? And Celestino says, faith is the seed, since the basis to tame the mind is virtue. May it mean Brahma Viharas too?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch, but you can say that the Brahma Viharas are related to virtue, in that the basic principle of morality is harmlessness and kindness. So through practicing the Brahma Viharas, then you will naturally be more virtuous. And as you practice virtue, that helps you to practice the Brahma Viharas as well. So yeah, I wouldn't directly equate the two, but I would say that they're mutually supportive.
And Gita says, we are so very fortunate to have the Mahasangha here in the world. The opportunity to offer dana to all monastics is absolutely wonderful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See, Gita, of course, is demonstrating the right mind to have. So she didn't say, oh, it's so great that, all these monastics can give me all of this and that, but rather she actually makes the statement, it's so great that I can give. It's incredible. This is why I always say anyone who is not born Buddhist always has to hang out with people who are born Buddhist, because the culture is so drenched with all these principles of Dhamma without having to sit down and actually do a lecture. Usually the average person who is born in a Buddhist country will have that natural inclination, natural mind that lights in all these ornaments of mind, as the Buddha calls them, of giving. Very selfless, beautiful practice. And so it says, dear Venerable, if we give donation and then donate the merit to someone else, saying, may this merit go to all of these people, etc., will that truly help those people out, or am I deluding myself? I think it will help you and them as well. We practice for ourselves and others, anything, sharing the merit, but also practicing meditation. Whenever we practice the Dhamma, it benefits every single sentient being. So yes, absolutely, sharing the merit helps others and helps yourself. So it's not that you're removing some of the merit for yourself and giving it to others, but actually you are helping yourself and everyone else. And Pablo, good to see you, good friend. Pablo, we've known Pablo actually since the beginning of Buddhist Insights, before, when we were homeless, and also like homeless, like literally in every single sense. So when Buddhist Insights didn't have a home, Pablo was participating in our street retreats.
Yeah.
And Pablo says, the topic of sowing seed has me thinking again about karma. Is generational karma possible? IOW?
IOW? I don't know what that acronym means.
In own words.
IOW? No.
I'm terrible with acronyms. So.
International World Order.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so we don't understand the IOW acronym, but we'll try our best. From previous family members to their, in other words. In other words, thank you, Sud. In other words, from previous family members to their children.
So, no. So according to the Buddhist understanding, karma is entirely personal and individual. So each person generates their own karma with every intentional action they do, of whether of body or mind. So every deliberate choice that we make generates karma. So it is karma. And then that will eventually produce a corresponding result, whether in this life or in future lives. So nobody else can generate karma for you. So no, your parents don't generate karma for you. You don't inherit karma from your parents or grandparents or anything like that. You generate your own karma and you inherit your own karma. This is quite clearly stated in many places in the suttas. So one of the contemplations the Buddha said we should do every day is karma sakomhi. So I am the owner of my own karma. The owner, karma sakomhi, karma dayado. I am the inheritor of my karma. Karma yoni. Yoni literally means, female generative organs. So I'm literally born from karma. Karma is my womb. Karma is the organ which produces me. So karma yoni, I'm born from my own karma. Karma bandhu, I'm bound to my karma. Karma patisarana. Patisarana means running back to or returning to. So karma patisarana means I return to my karma. So the Buddha here is quite clearly saying, like, karma it's entirely our own. We create our own karma, we own it, we're born from it, we're stuck to it, we can't get away from it, we're constantly returning to it. So this cannot be produced by other people, it can only be produced by ourselves.
So with that, how do we distinguish perhaps the trauma, the intergenerational trauma, or the trauma of that person growing up, the trauma from the parents transferred to the children? How do we distinguish that trauma, more like maybe causing conditions, from the karma of that person?
That's vipaka. So what you're talking about is the vipaka, the result of previous karma. So one of the problems is that the way the word karma has been adopted into the English language kind of mashes together the two Pali words, karma and vipaka. And it also incorporates ideas of predestiny and so on, which are foreign to Buddhism. So in Buddhism, there's a clear distinction between karma, which is the action you do, and vipaka, which is the result of that action. Vipaka is actually related to the word which means to come to fruit. It's also related to the word that means to cook something. Like when something is fully cooked or fully ripe. Both of these are related. They're the etymology of the word vipaka. So you make an action, and then when it comes to its full completion, that's the vipaka, the result, the consequence. So, for example, right now you have no hair. Why?
I shaved.
Right. So shaving your head was kamma, having no hair is vipaka. It's a very simple example.
Yeah, but I think that also when you're talking about intergenerational trauma, that is using another system of looking at reality, which is through the lenses of Western psychology, essentially. And usually in Western psychology, the perspective is a little bit different than in Buddhism in the way of there is, we're born for random reasons into a family, for random reasons has particular conditions, and then that influences this new being. The perspective of Buddhism, my understanding is instead it's our karma. So we may have done actions in the past that create the vipaka of being born in a particular family, which then, so it's coming from here rather than from here. So those, obviously those causes and conditions that happen within our life add on to the conditions that we already brought into this life. Do you see what I mean? And so intergenerational trauma, maybe we can see it as something that explains particular things in the particular life right now, but actually that intergenerational trauma comes from previous lives, where perhaps the people that you are in the family with you weren't even relating to. So that's, I think, the I don't know if my Italian English was if I was able to explain that properly, but it's a little bit different, the perspective in Buddhism than it is in psychology, because we don't have YOLO, but we have, it's not that you only live once, but you live multiple lives over and over again without discoverable beginning. So yeah, I mean, intergenerational trauma since forever, but you've also created that generational trauma in past lives. So each one of them, each one of us, essentially. So it's, you can fit it in, but in a different way than we are normally used to understand these things. And then Celestino says, if there is no predestination or future karma already established, how could Buddha foresee the future Buddhas and their path to awakening?
Well, actually, this is well explained in, there's a discourse where the Buddha talks about how he can look at a person's habits and behaviors, and based on that, he can predict where they're going to wind up. And he says, just as if you see a person walking along a road, and you know that at the other end of that road is, say, an oasis, then you can pretty reasonably predict that if the person keeps going in that direction, they're going to get to the oasis. And somebody else, they're walking along a road, and you know at the end of that oasis at the end of that road is a swamp. Well, you can pretty reasonably guess that if the person keeps going in that direction, they're going to wind up in the swamp. So there's still a possibility that somebody might make different choices along the way and therefore get a different destination. But the Buddha is saying, if they keep behaving in accordance with the patterns of behavior that they've been demonstrating so far, then that's where they're going to wind up. So it's the same. The Buddha can talk about current bodhisattvas and say, based upon what they're doing, they're probably going to wind up becoming the Buddha Maitreya or the Buddha whoever. And they're probably going to have such and such traits. But there's always a possibility that somebody might make different choices and turn out a bit differently.
Yeah, and I would say that also you don't even have to be a Buddha actually to predict the majority of beings. Actually, the majority of beings really predictable. I mean, when I was a teenager, I was able to predict what my sort of classmates were going to do in their 40s, and I was right. Very predictable. Doing the job that their parents were doing, and going to university. If they were going to university and having children, etc. It's kind of like very predictable. So yeah, as Bhante said, it's not necessarily predestination, but it's an apparent predestination. Also, because until the Dhamma, we hardly ever actually question our habits. We hardly ever question our reality, or ideas and things that actually society tells us, our own essentially dogmas, mental dogmas. So until we actually do the work of questioning it and realizing that we have internal dogmas to begin with, we will be extremely predictable. We'll do everything that, get a job, get a subscription, get a flat screen TV, drink that type of, drink, eat that type of food. We live in a society that it's extremely homogenous, extremely conformist, very predictable. Sorry, bad news with Yasoma. And then Kumu says, even inheriting illnesses based on genetics can be due to vipaka of that person, as that person was attracted to the parents due to her own karma. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the Buddha was quite clear. Again, the Chulakama Vibhanga Sutta is really helpful for getting a pretty clear sense of karma. The Buddha is quite clear that having a lot of illnesses and afflictions is the result of choices from previous lives. So it doesn't have anything to do with what your parents have done, but rather you wind up with those conditions because of choices made in past lives. And the opposite as well. The good conditions in our life are the result of good choices made in past lives.
This being said, I would like to just advise never to speculate on other people's karma. So only a Buddha actually can say exactly like what is the cause. Only an enlightened being, can see exactly what is the cause of a particular vipaka. And so usually when we get into the discussions of karma, it's important to understand causality, but it's also important not to start looking at others or ourselves and start judging and fantasizing and speculating, oh, this is that karma that you did, or that other bad thing that you did, or that other. It is what it is. So we can't control the consequences, but we can control the causes. That is the one teaching that my teaching of a lifetime actually made a huge impact on my mind, thanks to Dreame. She's not a monastic anymore, but she used to be a bhikkhuni back then. And yeah, so let's focus on creating new causes rather than the consequences of our actions of the past.
It's also good to view these things through the lens of anatta. In other words, just because somebody made some bad choice in a past life, that doesn't define them.
Yeah.
It's not who they are now. So somebody maybe in a past life, they did some nasty things, and as a result, now they have some health problems. I have chronic health problems. Had them my whole life. They don't seem to be going away. Well, that's some kind of vipaka operating. But if I'm not doing the same behaviors that created this vipaka, then that's not who I am. It's just a choice that was made at some point in the past. As long as we don't continue with those choices, there's no problem. That's not who we are.
Yeah, and also, once again, the Buddha advises us actually to not engage in that type of thinking. Who was I in the past? What will I be in the future?
What did I do in the past to get this result in the present? That's actually one of the things the Buddha specifically said not to waste your time thinking about.
Yeah. And
I often tend to think about Buddhism as not having absolutes of good and evil, like a heaven and a hell. Something's inherently good or inherently bad. So maybe that's wrong. But I would ask about, when we talk about good or bad karma, what is it good and bad in relationship to?
Well, actually, first off, I think we're drifting pretty far off the topic of the sutta. So getting into talking about karma it's always a lovely thing to talk about, but we are drifting off. So I wonder if maybe we should save the karma discussion for tomorrow evening.
Yeah, I would just say though briefly that it's whether it's leading to suffering, an increase of suffering, or a decrease of suffering. So that's how we generally talk about good karma, is less suffering, and bad karma instead leads to suffering.
I would also just briefly say that I sometimes think of it like there's green karma and purple karma and blue karma and red karma, like in the sense that karma produces a corresponding result. So you can create a lot of golf karma and you'll get a lot of golf vipaka. That's not good or bad. It just means you've cultivated an affinity for golf-related things. So it will keep popping up in your mind stream. So, but then also if you do harmful things, then you're creating an affinity with harm, and harm will manifest in your mind stream. So in that sense, yeah, karma is not strictly good and evil, but rather karma produces a corresponding result. So there is white and black karma in the sense of good and evil karma, but there's also red karma, blue karma, green karma, etc. Karma which produces a corresponding result, but which is not necessarily good or evil. Yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours on the subject.
And Andrew, you had
Question.
we opened the karma Pandora's box.
Let's save the karma Ken for tomorrow.
And Jim says, might be worth adding that both karma that both karma and the powers of a Buddha were said to be imponderables. Exactly, as a samsaric mind would not be able to comprehend the full scope of these things. Sadhu.
Yeah, we can only get the general idea, but the detailed workings of these things is something only an awakened yang can really understand. Okay.
Okay, and maybe we can actually keep on talking about karma because there are not other questions.
No.
Dana,
Tomorrow.
like everybody, it's like, okay, I got that. I nailed it. Let me talk about karma. Well, actually, Dana is karma.
So,
by the way, it's a kusala karma
So
that leads to the cessation of suffering. Well, this is part of the topic. Since we were talking about giving and why we actually hold all of these precepts. Yeah, actually, that is the one thing that we're encouraged always in Buddhist practice, is to start doing things not because we are expected to do them. Sometimes actually, even when we go to monasteries, well, if it's the work period, then I will work during the work period. But then if it's not the work period, who cares? And maybe actually even during the work period, like I'll skip the work period if I can. Because we tend to think in terms of this sort of exchange mind state of or duties or chores or things that we have to do. But rather, actually, the invitation is instead to cultivate that mind that wants to do good things because one understands the importance, the good karma that comes from doing good things in terms of liberation, not in terms of merit points that then you go to heaven, because also that is impermanent. But rather that brings to the cessation of suffering, and also how beautiful a mind is, a mind that actually wants to do good things for others. We have our friends here that do so many good acts of kindness to support the Sangha, to support the monastery, always with always looking for an opportunity to do good deeds. And it's actually delightful to see whenever I see our supporters. I always see these beautiful people, and they also happen to be good looking. But but when I'm talking about beauty, it's the beauty of mind, beauty of these qualities that have been developed. And most of the time we don't see them working. Most of the time nobody sees them working. But then we know. Right? They are waking up early to make food for the Sangha, or coming here and looking for an opportunity to clean up things. And when we start doing that and adopting that in our day-to-day life, then we see how we're practicing the teachings of the Buddha and how they are, they create this fertile ground to then practice samadhi and vipassana. So very, very important. And here we have Raj that says, Dear Venerables, what are the chances we have a human life in the next life, or do we avoid going to a bad place? Bhante?
Well, actually, the Buddha was quite clear that the karmic conditions for becoming a human are to follow the 5 precepts and practice generosity. That's it. So 5 precepts and dana. That's the basis for becoming human. So if you want to continue being a human, then that's it. 5 precepts and generosity. Pretty simple.
Okay. And so it asks, is right view good karma, merit producing? Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's fundamental to understand what we're doing. Usually we have so much delusion. So yeah, our mind is backwards. We think that certain things are lead to happiness when they lead to suffering, and vice versa. We think certain things lead to suffering when they actually lead to happiness. So we need to first and foremost establish ourselves in a theoretical right view at the very beginning, and then eventually our experience will match the theory, and it will be experiential, and we will know it for ourselves. And Andrew, I think had something to say.
Well, we're still answering karma questions, so I thought maybe I could ask my simple karma question.
Go for it. We have 10 minutes, so.
What is it that is different about a Sambuda that allows him to pinpoint like karmic locations almost in a way that an Arahant cannot? Is it like just the sheer power of his virtues are like such a high level that he can stretch his mind that far, or?
I don't think it's actually spoken about in detail in the suttas. Exactly what distinguishes the powers and abilities of a Sambuda from the powers and abilities of an Arahant. I can't think of anywhere where that's explained in detail. In some of the later apocryphal literature, this topic is explored, but that's when you get into apocrypha, it's always a little bit questionable, the conclusions they come to. Yeah, I wouldn't speculate about it too much.
Yeah, but the Buddha does say in a sutta, I can pick it up actually for you. I don't have it here on the top of my head, but I have it in my notes, where the Buddha specifically tells a layperson who is speculating on the karma of someone. And he refers to her as foolish, first and foremost, and then says straight ahead, like, only one like me, only myself or one like me can actually understand, how these things are. So please don't speculate. Essentially, that is the message. So he's very straightforward. Maybe he doesn't go into the details. I can't think of a sutta where he specifically says why only one like him. But I think the point is, don't speculate. That is not useful for yourself and for others. That he says over and over and over again. So I think we are getting into the realm of a handful of leaves. So essentially the Buddha just focused on the teachings that lead us towards liberation, rather than giving too much doctrinal sort of information. Right, Bhante?
Yeah.
Mary says, I've been around the monastery enough to know you both work very hard. If not for wages, you're paid in blessings for sure. Well, we definitely work, but I would say that the most important work that we do is, once again, the work that the Buddha told us to do. So the work of trying to remove greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. So that's all we're doing here, whether we're monastics or lay people here at Empty Cloud. And that's also what you do, Mary, here at Empty Cloud when you come and visit us, and also hopefully at home as well. So that is all good. So unless there are other comments or maybe we can end there with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
All right. Well, good to see you all, friends, and may you all be well and happy. May all good things come to you. And tomorrow morning, tune in with at 8 a.m. for Sutta Sat with Bhante Sudaso. And then in the evening, there will be monk chat with some of our venerable friends, hopefully, venerable guest friends here at Empty Cloud. And we'll see you tomorrow. Maybe well.